Okay, we are back with part two of our investment plus our power skip tier list. Now, the class we are going over today are SubDPS. These are units whose primary job is damage, and that damage is done primarily through off field. So their play style is you swap them in, they do their thing, you swap them out. Um, some of them provide very strong team buffs, which is where those units' powers may be, but also their DPS output is pretty respectable. It's not the only viable way to play them, but that's just kind of the most often way you do it. I think that sub DPS are the second most popular class in Genshin, and also they have kind of some of every element, and there's lots of options here. So sometimes you're going to have an open slot in your team, you'll just be like, I should bring one of these sub DPS in. That said, they're typically mid investment units in that they often need energy recharge, with an exception or two here, and they're going to want some offensive stats on top of that. So they require more investment than, say, a support would. Even though some supports can also act as sub DPS, these units take a little more to come online. That said, we have a lot of really great units here and a few meh ones. So let's see how it goes. Oh, here. We're going to start here, and I'm going to have Aether be all the travelers that aren't Dendro travelers. So we're kind of lumping Geo, Hydro, Electro, Animal Traveler together. And I just think there are so many better options for off-field geo damage. You have units like Albedo or now Chiori. For Animo supports like Sucrose, Venti, and Kazuha are all incredibly strong. For Hydro supports, I mean, Hydro Traveler is just terrible to the point where it's a meme. And for Electro supports, the Electro Traveler is an energy battery, and it's okay, but Fischl is also an energy battery, and she just does a lot more damage. So, sadly, most Travelers are pretty bad. Maybe Pyro and Cryo Traveler will be good. I hope so. Secondly, Lumine here is going to represent Dendro Traveler. Dendro Traveler does require a decent amount of energy recharge to come online, but the Dendro application is really good, especially if you infuse them with Electro or Hydro after the burst is down. Has a lot of area coverage. It has, not an obnoxious internal cooldown. So Dendro Traveler is actually really quite strong. I think the reason it's not in the meta is because we have units like Nahida, we have units like Baiju, we have healers like Yao Yao who do similar things, and they're just kind of better, but I don't think Dendro Traveler is weak. Fischl, I think, is an incredible unit. She's valid at C0, she's great at C6. I'm running a stringless on mine. I have been for years. I think you can use Elegy on her, but really stringless is amazing. Her best weapon, therefore, is a 4-star. Now that Thundering Fury works with Dendro, then she got better when that happened. So Fischl was always good. Then Thundering Fury worked with Dendro, so she got better. Dendro came out, she got better. And now there's the Golden Troop artifact set. She got better. So right now, Fischl is actually a phenomenally strong Electro Sub DPS. I think she's just completely busted. I think, though, when people want an Electro Sub DPS, they pulled Yai. But that said, I'm not convinced Yai is stronger than Fischl. And then, while Yai requires energy recharge, Fischl is energy positive. She's a great energy battery for your team as well. And if you swap into Burst, she has 100% uptime. She's an incredible unit. I think you should build Fischl if you have her. I don't think Yai is necessary because Fischl is too strong. Beto. Beto is good. She does a lot of damage. I think her weaknesses is, first of all, she has a high energy recharge requirement. Secondly, she needs Constellation, so her investment is pretty high overall. And thirdly, she's really only good at 2-target fights. So if you're fighting a lot of units, you're going to want someone with more coverage than her. And if you're single target, she's not good at all. So her use cases are kind of narrow. That said, in those cases, she's very strong. So the reason she's out of the meta is not because she's weak, but because you gotta have a 2-target fight. And it just doesn't happen that often. Okay, moving on. We're at Xingqiu. Xingqiu is an amazing unit. He has incredible Hydra application. He really only needs a Sack Sword to come online, though he scales great with investments. His constellations are great. He allows you to vape basically every hit with a Pyro DPS. He's great in freeze teams. He's great in electrocharge teams. Basically, if your unit does normal attacks, Xingqiu is great with him. He also has things like interruption resistance and damage mitigation and a little healing. He just brings a ton to the table. So, actually, on my account, Xingqiu is my most used unit in Abyss. And I think he's phenomenal. He's obviously has been meta, always will be. Albedo's a Geo sub DPS, which is kind of the problem. His real weakness is not so much his kit, but that Geo is not very good. I think the second issue is also he wants a defense sword, and Cinnabar Spindle, while an incredible weapon, is an event weapon. Now, Chiori's new signature weapon is pretty good on him, but that's a limited 5-star weapon, so he suffers from a lack of good options on his weapons. He also has a split scaling issue where his burst scales on attack and his scales on defense unless you get C2. But that said, I think Chiori is directly power corrupt him. Again, I don't think he's weak. I just think that there are almost always better options, right? He used to be very good in Hu Tao teams, for example. But then we got Yelan, who is just stronger. As I was saying, Yelan here, she has incredible damage, very high personal damage. She buffs your active character's damage on top of that, which is also amazing. She's a 5-star character. Her signature weapon is also amazing. And so Yelan ends up being one of the strongest sub DPSs in the game because of all that. So a lot of times, if you're looking for a character in that last slot, you can ask, well, why not Yelan? Or another thing I ask often is, well, why not Fischl? These are both incredible characters. But Yelan has been busted strong shit she comes out. She's BIS with every Hyper Bloom team and BIS with every Vape team. So she's astonishing. Yelan's clearly here. Rosaria needs a couple constellations to come online, but she's kind of circle impact, cryo sub DPS. She does a lot of damage. Doesn't have incredibly high energy requirements. She buffs your crit rate. Like Rosaria is just plain good. Um, I'd say that in terms if you need a cryo sub DPS, she's awesome. It's just sometimes you might want to have cryo utility instead of cryo damage. But in terms of cryo damage, she's great. Put her here. Aloy. Aloy is just worse Chongyun. Her skill is unusable. She has a cryo nuke, but the way the skill is coded, not only are you animation locked, you can't easily access her rush ability, and then even if she were to normal attack, she does no damage. So she's one of the worst characters in the game. Yai, she takes up more field time than Fischl. So what I'd say is she's a high investment official with a nuke. But her ER requirements mean she won't have as much stats. So typically you'll run her in like a Raiden hyper carry team. She does do a lot of damage. I always thought Fischl was really strong. I forget what her meta is, but she's pretty strong in the meta, but I'm still going to put her in busted tier. Kale is a free Dendro unit. She's fine. She does basically everything Dendro Traveler does, but a little worse. The two weaknesses is, first of all, her burst has an ICD on it, so her Dendro application is not as good. And then her skill animation locks you, so you're vulnerable during it. So she's like worse Dendro Traveler, but Dendro Traveler is pretty good, so it's fine. Lynette will eventually, with Constellations, get a little grouping, but she's an Animo sub DPS. I just think that if we're going to run Animo sub DPS, Jean will also heal. Sucrose, Kazuha, Venti will also CC. She's just weaker than all those. Like, she's fine. Not amazing. Purina does a lot of Hydro application, a lot of Hydro damage, and an incredible wide team buff. You do have a little bit restrictive teams, but she's an astonishing unit. She's incredibly powerful, definitely meta-defining. Chevreuse, 4-star Pyro sub DPS, but specifically for Overload teams. So she's kind of narrow, but she buffs Overload incredibly, so she's very strong in that specific situation. So kind of a niche character. But that said, in that niche, she's very good. Alright, so we're going to put her in the strong tier. Yanming is kind of this fun hop on top of someone's head Pyro sub DPS. He comes in, he does his hops, he leaves. You can almost run him as a main DPS. It's a really cool idea, but I don't think he's that strong overall. I think there are better Pyro options, and a lot of Pyro characters want to be on field anyway. So he's just like power crept when he came out. So sadly, he goes here. He's fine though. Chiori, our new 5-star. She's basically better Albedo. She requires a second Geo character that has a construct, so that really limits her teams. So she doesn't have a lot of viable teams. But that said, she's a Geo sub DPS, and it's just more damage than Albedo. So I think she's strong but narrow. As you look here, unsurprisingly, like we saw last time, there were very strong Animo supports, and that's because Animo, the swirl and the crowd control is super useful here. And then here in sub DPS, we have Hydro and Electro near the top, and that's because they just fit into a lot of team archetypes. Like for Vape or an Electrocharge or Bloom or Hyper Bloom, you're going to want Hydro. And then again for Overload, Mono Electro, over Vape, like a Raiden National, you can want these Electro teammates. And they're all very, very good in those specific situations. Um, Beto has a unique thing where she doesn't activate blooms because she can only target the enemy and not the bloom. But then she doesn't work with Raiden, so there's a little special things about her teammates. And then I think the suffering of, say, Chiori or Albedo is that Geo is just not great right now. Dendro, in terms of Traveler, Kale, they're fine, but I think Nahida is just way better than either of them. And they don't heal. So they're kind of power crept. Looking at Lynette, she doesn't bring healing or CC, so she's power crept. Ganming, when we get later on, Xiangling's just more damage, so he doesn't really have a place either. And then, I mean, free characters are normally kind of weaker than paid characters, but just how the Travelers are designed, they're not great yet. I mean, I still think they're worth leveling because you're going to have them forever, and maybe the new ones will be good. And then Aloy, like, her skill just doesn't work right. It's not any good. And her burst, while it does a lot of damage, you know, so does Chong Yun's, but he brings more to the table. So she's like, where's Chong Yun? And right now, Chong Yun isn't really great either. Okay, so that's it for our SubDPS power tier list. Hope that's helpful. We'll come back with a new one soon. And thank you.